Today on the podcast, Connor and I want to talk about a really interesting concept with AI and work. We know there's so much going on in the future of how work is evolving. We were just offline talking about some big changes and displacements in different areas and different work environments. We're going to talk a lot more about this. But McKinsey and General Catalyst, two real big thought leaders in this space, have been saying that the era of learn once, work forever is officially over. Connor and I want to dig into that, talk about some of these interesting concepts that were talked about recently at a keynote address at CES this year. Connor, what were you thinking about, I guess, this concept of learn once, work forever is being over?
Well, this whole thing, first of all, this is awesome. This is at CES, obviously in Vegas, and it's Jaeden and Conor, right, who did this, the All In podcast host, interviewed Bob Sternfeld, who's been the global managing partner of McKinsey for a few years now. He's just got reelected, I think, last year. And then the CEO of General Catalyst as well. A few things stood out to me. So when they mean learn once, work forever, they're talking about like, okay, you learn for, 15 or 20 years or whatever, or 22 years. And then, 22 years if you're talking about all of education. And then, you work for 40 years, and they're saying that's over. So first of all, I agree with that. But there's a lot of, Jaeden, the death of McKinsey and the death of consulting and all that kind of stuff. And I get to do a ton on future of work. Jaeden, you and I were just talking about future of work offline. Actually, was kind of interesting. But the idea here is nobody really knows, right? But what we do know is that it's not that, consultants aren't useful anymore. It's that the model of doing this is changing. In the same way, it's not like lawyers aren't useful anymore. It's that the model of law is changing because so much of work is put into people just doing slightly repetitive tasks. And even when I hear the word repetitive tasks, it drives me crazy because it's one of those in one ear, out the other type of phrases, just like human in the loop. So what do we actually mean? Well, when we think about, and by the way, being attached to a business school, as I've been at NYU Stern for the last 12 years on the MBA program, a lot of what you do in your training to be a consultant is, you're learning how to think, but you're also just like building decks and doing that stuff. You're just like up very late. Same with investment bankers. A lot of what they're being paid for is just sheer volume of work. Same with law. A lot of that will start going away, right? Because that work can be done and will be done faster. I mean, when you see what Nano Banana can do in one-shotting decks, it's amazing. And that just all of a sudden saves a ton of time. Same with law, like with what paralegals do in terms of research and then summarizing, and same in private equity, same in investment banking, things like that. It's not that work is going away, it's that it's getting sped up. And the idea is you still need to have people who are good at this stuff to decide what quality looks like. So Jaeden, you and I often talk about my son Finn, who's about to turn 17, and he has this great line, which is he's like, people can create senior level output, they just don't have senior level judgment, right? Which is a great line, right? And I'm like, hold on to that because that's really helpful. And I think
that's what put that on a plaque somewhere, really.
100%. It's such a great line. And I think the idea here is, Bob Sternfeld and so McKinsey and General Catalyst are both saying this era is over. But Jaeden, the interesting thing to me is that we sort of know that the interesting thing from this keynote and everything else is that nobody quite knows what's next. And that to me is the crux of the future of work. And what I mean by that is when I talk to organizations, I'll just kind of give you a sense of what I talk to leaders about for 1 second here, right? So I go into these companies and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, listen, the history of technology or the history of work rather, somebody creates a technology or a service, and then they know what goes into that. In other words, like if you've created the computer, you know that you're going to need people to build silicon chips, and you're going to need people to build keyboards, and you're going to need to figure out a supply chain, and you're going to need to figure out blah, blah, blah. And then you hire those people to do that thing because the inventor of that technology or that service understands that, and then you fill the jobs. So AI has completely disrupted that. Why? Because we know from Dario and from Sam and from Sundar and from everybody else who actually run the AI labs, they don't know what the future of work is. And then you hear from, the head of McKinsey and the head of General Catalyst, they don't know what the future of work is. Nobody does. We're all guessing. And the idea is, and what I at least tell leaders is, you have to move from this pyramid of where information flows down from the top to more of like what I call like heart of darkness, which is, there's something going on over on the 6th floor. How did they figure out how to reshape their process on that team? Let's go over there into the jungle of the 6th floor and find out, because that's the only way to do it. And you find 3 people doing the work of 14. And you're like, what are you doing? They're like, well, we used AI to do this. That's the future of work. It's been completely inverted. It's not going to be defined by the top anymore. And so my interest in this particular conversation right now that we're having right now is not so much this is going to change, because we know it's what's it going to change to. And Jaeden, would love your thoughts on this. And also what we were talking about, I think in the last podcast, if I remember, Jaeden, you were talking about vibe coding, right? That was our last
Yep.
podcast, I think. And this idea that you had 4 virtual assistants who lived abroad that you don't actually really need anymore. So you're living through this. So anyway, would love to hear any thoughts you have on all this stuff.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is that I think we're going through the reason why this is so top of mind for so many people is because we're going through this shift faster than every other shift. I think
Yeah.
if you look at other things like other shifts that happened in labor, we're just moving so much faster than mobile, cloud, or social ever happened. And so what's interesting is it's not just that AI is replacing cognitive labor, not just physical or mechanical, but like everything all at once. And so I think that there's kind of this pressure to adapt as fast as we can, which I've got a question for you on that in a second. But the thing that I do think is really interesting is, I look back, I think this is so right, what McKinsey and General Catalyst about like learn once, work forever, right? Like you don't go to a job anymore, learn the process, learn the roles,
Right.
and then just work that forever until you decide to quit or you retire, right? I think it has to shift. I think about my first job when I graduated. I worked at the Institute for Supply Management. It's like this 100-year-old supply management company. I worked in their marketing department. And I sit here today and think about the things I did. Like we were like running newsletters, and I was like in charge of their social platform, and I was doing like these video editing projects. Every single project I did for them, AI could 100% not just replace, but automate today. So I'm
Right.
like, oh my gosh, if I was still working there, would I still be working there? But I believe I would. And this is what I think is important for everybody that works at any organization to remember.
Mhm.
The projects I worked on were not successful because I was manually, like reading and copying and pasting the newsletter into a spreadsheet. That's not why they were successful. They were successful because I was getting on the phone. I was calling, in my case, it was like supply management professionals, asking them for tips and advice, consolidating it into reports, making templates and spreadsheets, adding it to this, like I was basically doing the overall strategy of these projects, looking at what do our customers want and how do we get that. Now, the menial labor, the small tasks of getting it done, I mean, it was just a drag. I didn't want to do it, but it had to be done. I think those elements are going to be completely automated and replaced. And so what you're left with is people that are going to succeed are going to be strategic thinkers that can look at the architecture of an entire AI workflow and the overall strategy. If you can see the end from the beginning, and if you can see this is the outcome I'd like to achieve and this is how we get there, these are the assets I need to acquire, and you figure out how to get those assets, you architect and build the system, you will be incredibly successful. But here's the catch. That system is constantly changing. The pieces that go into it are constantly changing. So your job isn't like, I created this thing that automated me out of a job. You constantly have to be optimizing this system. And if you're like, well, I made this amazing system that does this thing, it's like, great. So how do we make it better? How do we improve it? How do you do more? How do you do 4, similar tasks that will all see the same amount of ROI? And so you're building systems. I think everyone will turn into system builders, and you'll still be working, you'll still be doing things, but it's now kind of this high level vision, and whoever has the best vision and the best approach to that vision is going to be the winner.
Yeah. I think that's really well said, because what you're talking about is it's not the work, it's the judgment of the work, right? It's like sort of like figuring out like what's important, where should you focus? Because again, like, Gemini can do a ton of this. It can do a ton of that work. What it can't do is determine if that's the right answer or not. Do you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't know. And I love what you were talking about, especially about uh, you know, Claude or Gemini or whatever, ChatGPT can do all those tasks. What it can't do is have that human connection. And again, sometimes we say that and it just sounds kind of like in one ear out the other. It's like, well, we don't want to lose human connection or keep the human in the loop. I Every time I hear those little cliches, I'm always like, let's drill down and determine if that's true. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because it's like human in the loop. Guys, we all thought 2025 was going to be the year of the agent. It wasn't. And why wasn't it? Because agents can go off the rails. And what happens when they go off the rails? Jaeden, I think he was in that vibe coding episode that we did recently. I mean, I think was it? I guess it was our most recent episode. Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting. Or one before that. Anyway, whatever it was. The idea that you kept sort of saying, guys, if you do one thing, and Jaeden, I actually wrote it down because you're like, if you do one thing, and when Jaeden says, if you know one thing, here's what it is, guys, get your pen out because Jaeden is going to have some mad scientist recipe for you. And what you said, and I'll just kind of remind you on what you said, you're like, don't say, create this whole thing, here's the 4 steps, go. You say, here's the 4 things, first make a plan. Here's the 4 things, now do the first one. Let's see what that looks like. That's just good management of people, right? I mean, like, and that's essentially with Lovable what you're creating. You're creating I know you're vibe coding, but essentially you're creating an agent of sorts, right? And that's what it is. You need to sort of like have good judgment all along the way. So when we're thinking about the future of AI and work and everything like that, and you're talking and kind of like making your case for your job and everything else in your company or what you want to do next or anything like that, focus there. Don't just say, oh, keep a human in the loop. Why? Say why it's important. It's important because if these things go off the rails, it's very dangerous. So I am super excited about that. I'm really thrilled that these conversations are happening, but I want people to start getting specific about why and what's coming next rather than sort of like the very, very high level, this era is over, because people don't know what to do with that. You want to know why people are freaking out and why this is going to be a huge political issue and everything else? Because all they're hearing is like, this is all going to change without giving people a sense of like what's coming next. That's where I get really passionate.
Yes. Okay. And in a sense of what's coming next, McKinsey does have some predictions. I would love to get your take on them before we wrap up the show. So here's what McKinsey is predicting, what they believe will happen. They expect that there will be one AI agent per employee by the end of 2026. I think generally, I think this is true. I think many people will have none and some people will have 10. So there's going to be a bell curve to it. They said headcount is going to stay flat, but role composition is going to change. And here's what they think will change, which I think is very interesting. Client-facing roles are going to increase by 25%. If I am working with a company, I want to get on a call. I want to talk to a real person. I want to know that there's someone, if I have an issue, they will do the problem. They'll solve my problem. Do they personally need to solve that problem? No. They're going to have an AI agent and a system that will solve the problem for me, but I want to be able to talk to a real person about it. I think that's kind of their argument, and I tend to agree. Like, that sounds more comfortable, that sounds more familiar, but I will actually have a dissenting opinion on that from an experience I had yesterday. Yesterday, I was on my 11 Labs account. I've told you, Connor, before that I'm currently on the $1,300 a month tier because I had this massive project going on with 11 Labs. That was crazy. And I have like 11 million tokens from this. And I'm like, you know what? I don't need this many tokens next month. So I lowered to a lower tier. And I was like, okay, what happens if I don't use up all my 11 million tokens by the end of the month? Do they just disappear? I'm like, that kind of suck if my 13 grand evaporated. So I was like, I want to talk to a customer support person over there before I make sure, because I was going to like hire like 5 more virtual assistants to go on the account and just burn through all my tokens if I had to do that before the end of the month or whatever. So I'm like trying to find a customer support thing, and I can't find it anywhere. There is like a chat with us button. So I click that, and because it's 11 Labs, they're audio first, right? There's a little bubble that pops up on the screen, and it's like, hey, like Jaeden, what questions do you have about your account? And I'm like, I don't even know where my microphone's picking up. I'm like, is my laptop on the floor? Like, is my podcast mic picking me up? I don't know. I'm just like talking in my room, like yelling at my computer. I'm like, will my credits roll over at the end of the month? Like, what's going on, And it's like, oh yeah, great question. Because you have this many credits, and this is like, and you're on this tier, but you're going to be lowering to this lower tier next month. Your credits will roll over for 2 months. So assuming you use all your credits before then, you should be good. It was the slickest. It was like, do you have any other questions? I just closed it. It was the slickest experience I've had in my life. There was no phone call. There was no like, press 1 to speak in Spanish. There was it was just immediately answered my question. It had immediate insights into my account and knew exactly how much I paid, exactly what subscription tier, exactly how many credits. I asked my question and I was done in 10 seconds. And I am not joking. It was the best customer support experience I've had in my entire life, probably. And so I tend to think, yes, a lot of people, especially in sales, are going to want more client-facing roles. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of those roles that can be done completely by AI as well.
Jane, I wish we had 20 more minutes on this episode. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And it always reminds me we should get somebody from 11 Labs on here, because we should helping support them from the beginning.
I'm holding up the company.
I pay for 11 Labs. I have for 2-3 years now. I barely use it, but I'm like, it's such a good product that I just kind of want to keep that subscription. Guys, if there's 9 people out there, and I mean this specifically, 9, we are at 141 reviews right now. If you can go on, we don't get a lot of outside sponsors, anything like that. This is what we would love. We'd love to get over to 150. It helps us with reach. It helps us with guests, everything else. 9 of you who have not left a review, we would love it. It would mean the world to us. We will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.